Hi, my name is Robert Archer, and today we will be reviewing the introductory campaign of Age of Empires 2, that of William Wallace, which is where many of us have first became entranced with this beautiful game. I still fondly remember my first footsteps into the darkness of the first mission as I learned the ropes of the game, guided by that epic narration that still echoes in my head to this day.
The English are terrorizing all of Scotland, and it's time for us to fight back. But if we're to defeat them, every one of us will need to learn how to march and fight.
My love of history got kick-started playing the campaigns of Age of Kings and later Age of Conquerors back in the early 2000s, and today I want to actually review the history on which these campaigns are based. And where better to start off with the first campaign, that of William Wallace. This is Age of Histories. One thing I want to point out before we jump into the missions themselves is the feeling the campaign evokes throughout its presentation. The campaign map and the cutscenes were clearly inspired by the movie Braveheart that was just released 4 years before the game's development. One noticeable aspect of this is the presence of kilts and tartans in the artwork, as well as of bagpipes in the sound design, all of which did not appear in Scotland until at least 200 years after William Wallace, and were not adopted as we know them today until the 18th century. But that aside, the missions of William Wallace's campaign are clearly intended to serve as a tutorial and not exactly a history lesson. However, I do like the idea of you being a recruit coming down from the Highlands as you are being trained in the art of war until the final showdown against Longshanks himself. Because of this, we will be focusing on two scenarios from this campaign, the Battle of Stirling and the Battle of Falkirk. However, we will touch upon a bit as well the Forge an Alliance scenario. Now, throughout this series, we will be using the narration and the cutscenes from the original game and not from DE, for two main reasons. Firstly, this for me is a nostalgia trip, as much as I hope it will be for you as well. And secondly, I generally believe that the narration especially was of better quality in the original game than DE. However, the artwork and the geographical placeholders in the campaign maps were better in DE.
We are without a leader. The dead King of Scotland has no heir. War creeps in from the south, where Edward Longshanks, the avaricious King of England, has returned from successful campaigns to conquer Wales and France. As Longshanks turns his attention to Scotland, the shadow of fear settles across the Highlands. The English have thousands of Welsh longbowmen, hundreds of knights on horseback, and dozens of siege weapons. We Scottish have a rabble of untrained soldiers who do not even know how to march in a straight line. We must act soon if we have any chance of resistance. We need to forge an army by any means necessary.
The intro of the first scenario paints a bleak picture of the Kingdom of Scotland in the year 1290. The dead King of Scotland the narrator is referring to was King Alexander III, who died 4 years before after he fell off a cliff whilst riding in dense fog on his way to his young bride. His only living successor was his granddaughter Margaret, the Maid of Norway, who was only 3 years old, and to secure the safety of the kingdom, the Guardians of Scotland agreed with the King of England, Edward I Longshanks, to marry Margaret to his son, Edward II, but she herself died on her way to Scotland. This resulted in a succession crisis with no less than 13 rival claimants. However, the Guardians of Scotland decided to ask Longshanks to help mediate the succession talks so as to avoid a civil war. It would prove to be a grave error, as Longshanks had been eyeing to dominate Scotland for a long time, and used this opportunity to elevate John Balliol to the throne in 1292, but only to serve as a puppet and turning Scotland into his vassal.
Edward Longshanks, for all his disrepute, has shown military tactics in Wales, England and France to be very effective, if not cruel and ruthless. He's indeed an enemy to be feared. The English sacked the town of Berwick upon Tweed. Would that I could call it a battle, but it was truly more of a massacre. Unless we organize our army, there will be more massacres to follow. I pray we can be ready for Longshanks coming.
Longshanks had no respect for John Balliol or Scotland as an equal, and indeed King Balliol had to publicly swear fealty to King Edward in order to secure his support. The English king repeatedly humiliated Balliol and exacted tribute from the Scots, but when Longshanks demanded the Scots provide soldiers to bolster the English ranks in their fight against the French, the Scots instead turned on Longshanks and formed an alliance with the French, launching an attack into England itself in late March of 1296, but this was turned back at Carlisle. In response, a few days later, Longshanks attacked and sacked the border town of Berwick-upon-Tweed, Scotland's most important trading port. What ensued was a bloody slaughter and a sack of the town that clearly marked the English intentions on Scotland.
In villages throughout the Highlands, there is grim talk of skirmishes between Scotland and England. We lost the city of Dunbar this week. Scottish defenders broke ranks and fled. The English have an army that is larger and better trained. To compete with them, we are going to need new recruits to pick up the spear, sword, or bow. We must remake these shepherds into soldiers.
Following the sacking of Berwick-upon-Tweed, John Balliol formally defied Longshanks by renouncing any fealty he had previously sworn. As the cutscenes we have just seen mentioned, Edward pushed north towards Dunbar, to which he laid siege. Balliol sent a force under John Comyn to help relieve Dunbar, and a battle ensued just south of the castle at a river crossing by the spot Burn. The Scots, having the high ground, waited for the English under the Earl of Surrey to cross the river until they attacked. But the Scots underestimated the difficulty of the terrain that they themselves had chosen, and the charge became a disorganized mess. The English in turn countercharged after their crossing and routed the scattered Scots, capturing many in the process. Dunbar Castle quickly surrendered thereafter, allowing Longshanks to capture Edinburgh and receiving the surrender of the vital castle at Stirling in the following days. Without encountering any significant resistance, Longshanks kept moving north until he captured the city of Perth, where he also captured John Balliol, whom he dethroned and arrested. On his way back south, Edward took the Stone of Destiny from Scone, the historic crowning place of the Scots, as well as the royal regalia from Edinburgh, and then relegated the Kingdom of Scotland to a land under the dominion of the English crown. Longshanks believed that Scotland had been completely subdued at this point and headed back to London. But not all embers of resistance had been successfully quenched.
Rumours creep in from the south of a giant who leads the forces of Scotland, his great sword driving through earth and man and horse alike. If this mythical knight can hold the English advance, it will give us time to develop the arms we need. Even now our smiths are forging swords and fletchers are making arrows and crossbow bolts. Longshanks has invaded, stormed and sacked the city of Perth. It's worse, he's captured the fabled Stone of Scone and declared himself King of Scotland. If we cannot bring about a victory in battle soon, then the Scottish armies will be too demoralized to put up any fight at all. If this mythical Scottish giant does exist, I wish he'd get his forces up to Stirling, where we shall next do battle.
The Battle of Stirling scenario does not look to portray the battle itself, as you, the player, still learning the ropes, probably wouldn't be able to handle such a thing. I know 7-year-old me was not ready to handle anything bigger than what the devs gave us. And thus the scenario is actually set to be on the road to the castle of Stirling as you meet an English camp by the sea. The image you are seeing at the moment is the closest I could get to match the scenario with the real world. These scenarios often don't match up with real events, especially in the original iteration of Age of Empires 2, but I still like to find such places and see how they compare. The real Battle of Stirling Bridge occurred on the 11th September 1297 and was the result of the uprisings across Scotland earlier in the same year. Longshanks sent an army to deal with the troublesome Scots, led by William Wallace and Andrew de Moray, and the two forces met just north of the Stirling castle. Outnumbered and outmatched, the genius of Wallace and Moray was to wait for the English to start crossing the River Forth before they attacked. Surprised and disoriented, the English vanguard got cut down by the Scots, forcing them to destroy the bridge to hold back the Scottish onslaught. The English defeat at Stirling was total, and gave the Scots newfound hope that they could win back their freedom. However, the price paid by the Scots was that de Moray was slain as a result of his wounds suffered on the field, leaving Wallace to be the undisputed sole guardian of Scotland and leader of Scottish resistance.
Stirling was our first great victory. Even as we held the coastline, word came in that the Stirling Bridge had been held by a force of Scots led by the mythical knight, of whom so many have spoken. Now, we know his name. Sir William Wallace, the Hammer of the English. Edward Longshanks names Wallace a traitor and a criminal, but Sir William replies that he cannot be a traitor, since he never swore fealty to an English king. With Wallace leading our armies, the men fight with renewed vigor. Perhaps the tide of our misfortunes is about to turn.
The next scenario is another tutorial that helps you learn how to use the market and to trade, as well as to learn about the monastery and relics. I like to think of this scenario as a nod to the real-life influence of the church in medieval politics and social life. When Longshanks occupied Scotland, he replaced many Scottish clerics with English ones to help him in the occupation of Scottish hearts and minds. This would not be allowed to pass unanswered, and the Scottish clergy would play an important role in motivating the people against the English both during Wallace's time and much more so after it.
With the three relics now locked away safely in Scottish churches, men murmur that we are blessed by the heavens. Our army now stands a chance as we prepare for the final clash with the English. Scotland now has archers and knights of our own with which to meet Longshanks. We march south to Falkirk, where we will rendezvous with the army of William Wallace and plan our combined attack upon the English castle.
Following his victory at Stirling, Wallace led a significant raid into English lands in November of 1297 in order to ravage the enemy as well as to help restore Scottish morale, coffers and grain stores. In the movie Braveheart, Wallace manages to conquer the city of York, but this, along with much of that movie, is historically nonsense. In reality, Wallace raided only as far south as Newcastle and did not conquer any territory per se until his withdrawal back north of the border the following January. Incensed by the Scottish insolence, Longshanks returned from his campaign in France and assembled a large force at Roxburgh to deal with Wallace personally. Delayed by the weather and the Welsh mutiny, Edward marched into Scotland in the summer, and on the 22nd of July 1298, the two armies met on the fields by the town of Falkirk.
The only way we can hold the boggy lowlands around Falkirk is to build a castle and as many walls as we can construct in a short time. These fortifications will serve to protect our camp as we construct siege weapons with which to assault the English castle. Once the castle is constructed, Wallace himself has sworn to join our forces, and together we will attack Longshanks and his English troops.
During these reviews, we will not go into the accuracy of the battlefield strategies of the opposing forces. This is a game after all, and it is not meant to be an accurate representation in the same way a battle from the Total War franchise might. But what I will say is that William Wallace did not arrive at the battle by boat as the scenario tells us, and there was not a river crossing. In reality, the Scots had arrayed themselves in a hedgehog-like formation called schiltrums, in order to protect themselves from the English heavy horse. These were very effective to blunt any cavalry or infantry charge, but the English had overwhelming longbow support that could pick off the Scots from close range until the formations broke apart and the English routed them from the field. Unlike the scenario, the Battle of Falkirk was a disastrous defeat for the Scottish cause, and William Wallace would end up going into hiding in Selkirk Forest, from where he would direct a guerrilla campaign against the English occupiers. And it was from here that the legend of William Wallace took on mythic proportions, and much of what we know of the Wallace legend originates from this period. The final cutscene of the campaign, as grand as the narrator makes it out to be, is quite out of place given the fact that Falkirk was a decisive defeat. And I think it would have actually fit better as an aftermath of the Stirling scenario, given the sense of hope that was very real following that victory.
It looked certain that we would be defeated at Falkirk. Yet, somehow, though outnumbered and outranged by English longbows, we were victorious! English castle was torn down, and a Scottish one will be built in its place. William Wallace has shown us the path to victory. Although he's but one man, he inspires great deeds in others, and many of the Scottish princes and lords have drawn their swords with his. Wallace's own sword is a 5.5-foot beast, forged, of course, in Scotland. He has sworn not to rest until his sword finds the neck of Edward Longshanks. The struggle will continue, but we have learned the ways of war. Now, it is the English who will know fear.
By September of the same year, Wallace resigned his guardianship of Scotland in favour of Robert the Bruce, in order to help solidify support around the Bruce's claim for the Scottish crown. Following this, details about Wallace's activities are quite vague. What we do know is that he met the French king Philip IV to ask for assistance against the English sometime in the year 1300, and that he was involved in a number of skirmishes in Scotland in the year 1304. A year later, however, on the 5th of August 1305, Wallace was betrayed by a Scottish nobleman at Rob Royston near Glasgow and was captured by the English. He was immediately carted off to London to face trial for treason at Westminster Hall a few days later. Following the trial on the 23rd of August, Wallace was taken to the Tower of London, where he was stripped, dragged across the streets, hung, drawn, and quartered. This was the most gruesome punishment that Longshanks could inflict on Wallace, as he wanted to strike fear into the hearts of the Scots, hoping that they would not rise again. This would have the opposite effect, however, as the brutal execution of their beloved hero infuriated the Scots, causing them to rise and rise again, until Robert the Bruce was crowned King of Scotland in March of the following year, thanks to a lot of help from the clergy, as we alluded earlier. His victories, especially at Loudon Hill in 1307 and later at Bannockburn in 1314, finally assured that the Scots would live free and independent from the English for centuries to come. That's it from me for today. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Age of Histories, and don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons so you will get notified when I'll be releasing the next campaign episode, as we'll be meeting the Maid of Orleans, Joan of Arc.